Okay guys, welcome back to episode 3 of our Halloween game. Today we are going to be carrying on working on with our laying out of our buttons. Today we're going to be working on actually writing the code that will instantiate the right number of buttons that we need depending on the level that we select on the level select scene. That is what we're going to be doing today. In the previous episode at the end we had a crash in Unity, so it kind of stopped us from carrying on, and in this episode I'm just going to show you something that I added onto that episode. Well, that I was supposed to add onto that episode, but I didn't because obviously it crashed. But we have left off exactly where we were in the last episode. So let's jump straight into here, and I can show you. So this is where we left off. Yes, in a couple of days ago, I think, or in the previous episode. We instantiated. Well, what do we do? Let's see. Where's our hierarchy here? Here we just added a few buttons just to see how the grid layout worked. The more buttons you add, the more the grid layout actually changes. So as soon as you add multiple buttons, it gets to a certain point where there's enough buttons in one row, so it makes another row underneath it, and yeah, just depending on how many cards you have, depends on how many rows you'll have. So by the looks of it, I think we all have 4. So by the looks of it, we will have a 8-column layout, and then depending on how many cards we have, probably I think we might need to restrict that, because obviously with our script here we have a card level which has 60 cards in it, so we might have to make the cards slightly smaller, but we'll see how that looks when we get there. So we'll delete those cards. The only thing we want now is this one card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a prefab out of this card and then actually delete it out of the scene, because we want to go ahead and use code to instantiate all of our cards. So in our assets folder we will create a new folder, and this one obviously we shall call prefabs. Let me just make sure you can see this. Okay, so let us go. First of all, is there anything else we need to do to this button? Not at the moment, I don't think. So what we will do is we will go ahead and drag this into our prefabs folder. So now this button is now a prefab, so let's go ahead and delete that out of our scene. And then on our panel we will add a new empty object, and we will call this button controller. And then on this button controller I am going to add a script called add buttons. So I'm going to create the script, and then I'm going to open it. First of all, drag it into our scripts folder, then we can go ahead and open it. And then what we want to do is, as soon as the game actually starts up, we want to go ahead and instantiate the right amount of buttons that we need in the scene. So to do that, I am going to get rid of these two methods, and I'm going to create an awake method, because obviously the awake method is the first method that gets called before the start, before the start method. So in the awake method we want to go ahead and instantiate the right number of buttons. So to do this we will need 2 references. One reference is the reference for the panel where we want the buttons to be instantiated, and then the second reference is the reference to the button prefab, just so that our code knows what it needs to instantiate. So let's go and create a serialized field. We'll need 2 of them. So serialized field private. This is going to be a transform, and we will call this, what have we named it? Panel. Okay. We will rename this to let's name this to game board, just because this is where our game is going to be. So in here we will call this game board, like that, so that it just stays consistent. Then we'll copy and paste that, and in here this is going to be a game object because this is going to be a reference to our button. And in here we want to call this a card button, if I can spell right, button. Okay, there we go. So we will go back into our Unity editor, and now we can go onto our button controller and we can drag these in. So we'll drag in our game board, and then for our button I'm just going to rename this also to, what did I name it as? Card button. So let's go and rename this to card button, like that. And then on our button controller we can drag that into there. So now the only thing we have left to do is to actually instantiate these buttons. So depending on what's called in our global here, we have a level, a static level variable there that holds the value of buttons that we need to instantiate. So that is how we're going to determine how many buttons we need to add. So in our awake button, in our awake method here, we need to make a for loop. So for int I is equal to 0, where I is less than global, if I can type that correctly, global dot level and then I plus plus. So in here, this is where we're going to instantiate our button. So we can go ahead and do that straight away. So let's go and say game object button equals instantiate, and then we'll instantiate our card button. So that should instantiate our number of buttons depending on how many we need. So what we'll do now is we'll save that, and let's go back into our game and see if this works. Let's just make sure we've got everything. So we've dragged those in. We can go back to our menu scene, save that. So let's go press play. If we press play, we'll start with easy now. So let's see, you have playing with 12 cards. Okay, so now we can see here we have, how many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so that it is working. We now have 12 cards. Just to make this easier so that we don't have to count the cards, I am going to put here button dot name is equal to I. Just like that. So let's save that, and then we will go back out of the game play and we will start again. And just to make sure that it works for all of them, I'm going to try medium, open up our game scene here. Okay, so now we've got 25 buttons. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to play again, and I'm going to try the hard level. Let's press hard, and then we will open it up, and now we should have 69. Okay, so 60, sorry, so 59, but it starts at 0, so that is 60 buttons. Okay, that's good. But there's one problem. If we play it, you can actually see that you can't really see the buttons. So where are the buttons? That's the problem. So let's try and fix this. Let us go into here and say, actually let's go and see this. So where are these spawning or being instantiated? Are they being instantiated into the right place? Okay, so they're not. So what we want them, well, where we want them to be is here in our game board, underneath our game board as a child object. So let's go and do that. So I think let's go and say button dot transform dot what is it, dot set parent. We want to set the parent to our game board. And then we want to set the world position to false. Actually, let's see, what does it say? If true, the parent relative position, scale, and rotation are modified such that the object keeps the same world space position, rotation, and scale. Okay, so we want this to be false, yeah. So we'll set that to false, save that, and then go back into here and play the game and see what we get. So let us try and see if we... Okay, so there we go. We can see, well, we can now see our buttons. So let us see what is happening here. Why are we getting... Okay, so our first one is there, a button controller is there. Okay, so I am going to take this out of our game board and just put it at the top, just to make sure that this works. So let's do that again, because obviously if you do it in gameplay mode it does not save. So game scene, yeah, we're in game scene, game board. Let's bring this out. Actually, you know what, I am going to simply delete this because we don't really need that. And then on our game board I am going to add a component, and this is going to be add buttons. So on here, let's drag in, can you drag in itself? Game board and a card, let's see if this works. So we'll do that. This probably won't work because we don't have, well, yeah, we're playing 0 cards. So we need to start this from the beginning, or rather, let's just start it from here. We shall select the easy game. Okay, so that's working. You can now see we have our cards and we can now press on the cards, which is nice. So let us see what's next. So now we have our cards. Let's go and get rid of that because we don't really need that. Where is it? Game manager. We don't really need that. So now in our game manager we want to go and change a few things. This is going to be the background image of the button to make it look like the card. In other words, the white button is going to look like it's facing down because you're going to see the back of it. So if we press easy, you can see this here. These are buttons, but they're going to be our cards that we press on to flip them. And at the start of the game we want them to display the back of the card, which is this picture here, this one. So that's what we want the white to be. We want to replace it with that. So to do that we need to create a new script, or actually we don't. We can use this game manager here, and in our start method, or rather let's first create the method. So here underneath our start method we want to create a new method called get buttons. So let's say private void get buttons. So in here we are going to go into the scene, or at the start of the scene we're going to go through all the game objects and fetch all of the buttons. So let's do that. We need to, in our get buttons method here, we need to go and say game object, and this is going to be a list because we're going to keep a list of all of our buttons. So here we will say objects, or let's say buttons, like that. Game object, or the array of game objects, we'll call it buttons, is equal to game object dot find object objects with tag, because there's going to be multiple of them. So objects, we will call this global dot, what are we going to name it, button tag, like that. So let's go into our global here and create that. So this is going to be called, or we'll name this to button, like that. And in here we will say what is it called, button. We'll just name it button for now, I think. You can leave it like that. We'll go back into our game manager. That error should be gone, so that's fine. So the next thing we want to do is we want to we need to get a reference to the background image that we want. So we can create another serialized field here and call this, this is going to be a private first, private right. We'll call this background card image, just so we know what it's used for. So we'll save that, and then let's jump back into the Unity editor so we can drag that in. Where did we put this? On our, let's see, it's going to be in our game scene somewhere. Game scene, game manager. Here we have a reference to it, so let's go and drag that in there. Card background, we'll pop that in there. Cool. Okay, what next? So now that we get, we're not really getting these, so let's go here and say get all buttons in scene with tag button. I think that's the tag. Okay, so in here all we need to do is say get buttons, and that should call this method that will execute all the code that's in here. So now that we've got our buttons and that we are adding them to an array of game objects, we now need to go through all of these buttons and reset the background image. So to do that, let's create a for loop. So for int I is equal to 0. You can use any letter or anything you want here. I just prefer to use I because that's how I was taught in uni. I've always done it, so we stick to I. So int I is equal to 0. I is going to be less than the buttons dot length. And then we want to iterate over them, so I++. So the only thing we want to do in here is we want to add them to another list which we will create up here, and then after that we want to go and change the image of it. So let's change the image first. So here we will say, actually we need to add them to a list first, because we need to use the list. We need to access the buttons from the list to change the image. So here we will say public, what are we going to call it? Let's call it public. First of all, it needs to be a list of button type, and then we will call it card button list. Okay, so that is going to be a new list of type button. That needs to be out here, and also this needs to be just button. That should be fine. Is it? Not buttons, just button. So that should be fine. We need to import UI, sorry, my bad, .ui. So that should be fine. Cool. So now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and add all of these to our list. So here we can go and say card button list dot add. Here we want to add the buttons at index of I dot get component button. So we'll add in the button component into our list, not L, we need a semicolon. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to jump back into Unity, and let's play the game and see what happens. So we should, if we made this public, which it is, we should be able to see, save that, we should be able to see in our inspector all the buttons that get added to the, okay, first of all, we need to go and add a tag onto here. So let's go ahead and open up our button prefab, create a new tag. We will call this button, save that, and on our button we will add that onto it. So we will save that, Now if we go back to our scene, the level select scene, we should be able to press easy, go into our game manager, and here you can see our card button list. We now have 12 buttons, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's correct, and in our list here you can see all of them that have been added, so that's working nicely. What do we want to do now? Now we need to go ahead and change the background image. So this is simple. All we need to do is just change add one line of code, and this is going to be card buttons list dot list, and then we need to get the index, so I. So for every button in this list, we will access the image component on it, because okay, I can't show you because there's no buttons in the scene right now. And then on our image we will access the sprite component, and then we will simply change that to the background card image. So that should be fine. We'll save that, and now we can go ahead and jump back into here, and hopefully when we press, or when we select a a level select, we should see that we have the correct image, which we do. So that's working nicely. Yeah, you can see we have our buttons and they work really good. So something we could add to this game, just so it makes it look like you're actually pressing the card, is we could add a little bit of a scale effect. Let's see. If we open up our card, what can we do here? Button, interact, transition, animation. Let's try this quick. Okay, I think we will save this for the next episode, because honestly I forgot how to do this. Might have to watch my own tutorial. That's funny. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's episode. We have our background images working nicely. So let's go ahead and press medium and see what we got. Okay, so we need to sort out this problem here, where we have cards that are going off the screen, because especially when we play our hard level, we will get multiple of them off the screen. So for that, we will go ahead and resize the cards somehow. Need to figure that out somehow. Do some research into that. But yeah, that is pretty much it for today's episode. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and even give this a like if you want. But yeah, I'll see you in the next episode, where we will carry on with our spooky Halloween themed game. So yeah, goodbye.